Okay, well, Mike, it is wonderful to have you here.
Pleasure to be here, Kim.
And thank you for that introduction. It's tough to change culture in any company, but we want to talk about the energy business, which has been traditionally male-dominated. So tell us from your perspective, what's going on in the energy business right now?
Sure. So as Schneider Electric, we work in the energy and electrification business. And of course, that means that we're very deeply involved in the engineering world. So what we focus on is the topic we like to focus on in the energy business as a company in terms of changing culture is, again, how can we drive that diversity? How can we improve the diversity of our industry? Because, as you know, let's say the STEM topic and the number of people studying engineering at the moment is probably not where we would like it to be.
Sure.
So the question we address is how do we play our contribution to that?
And what do you think, what is the issue? What are the main issues that are holding us back?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is cultural. I've had the pleasure with Schneider to work around the world in different cultures, and it's striking when you move from one country to another what the perception of diversity is, first of all, and even in an engineering culture, the status of an engineer, for example, is it seen as being a real job, or is it something that's done in the back office with a load of geeks sort of thing? And I think it really goes down to that point. And how do you? It's not just about okay, let's change the diversity of the industry. It's how do you actually change the perception of STEM and particularly engineering?
And I want to come back to that point because I think it's a really important point. You had mentioned that there are sort of two important moments in time in a person's life where there may be some road bumps. Can you describe that for us? Yeah,
so upon reflection and experiencing the industry a little bit, sort of just come to the conclusion that there are two important points at which the industry needs to have an inflection point if it wants to make a change. One is at 10 years old and the other is at 40 years old. Okay, so let's start at 40 years old.
Yes.
Okay, because I'm a little bit past that, so I can say I'm not part of that problem. So, but at 40 years old, people are in their careers, they're doing well, they've sort of settled into a pattern, and we see this very much in our industry. And there's this tendency to just keep hiring as you've already hired, because first of all, if you're still in your job, it means you've probably been successful.
Yes.
So you're going to continue to hire what has made you successful so far. So there's, I wouldn't call it a bias, but there's just a natural tendency to keep repeating what you've done because that's what made you successful. Okay? Yeah. The challenge of that, of course, is as the world changes, how do you make sure you change that, and how do you look at different profiles to change your team, for example, to change your company's board, to be ready for the future? Okay, so I think around the 40 is where a lot of the hiring decisions are made, where we as a company focus very much and try to make sure that we're moving the needle in terms of changing people's opinions.
Before we get to 10, let me ask you about that in particular, because we often hear that there's a pipeline issue, right? Yeah. And then as you're talking about hiring practices, we know we need to change the trajectory of this quote-unquote pipeline issue, which I think is a myth. But let's talk a little bit about how we do that.
Yeah. At the 10 or at the 40?
At the 40.
At the 40. At the 40. I think the challenge of the 40 is I agree with you. I don't think it's a pipeline issue. I think even if the number of, let's say, engineering candidates is less than 50-50 in the market, I think there's still a lot of things company can be doing. So one of the things we focus on is we're pretty rigorous in trying to say, we want to hire 50-50. So we're not going to fill a position unless we're convinced that there has been a reasonable attempt at finding a 50-50 shortlist, for example. Okay, and just by insisting on behaviors, and it's not an authoritarian thing. It's just saying if we want to move the needle to 50-50, then we have to start at the hiring process.
Yes.
So how do we insist and make sure that we can hire in at 50-50? Yeah. And that just encourages people a little bit to open their minds a bit more and say, look at different profiles and challenge their own internal thinking of, okay, that's what made me successful, but now I need to do something different if I want to get to the next level of success.
Yeah, and you made two, I had the advantage of having talked to him before this moment. So you made two really interesting points. One I thought was really interesting about the idea of overcorrecting in the beginning.
Yeah.
And maybe you could explain that too, because I know people would be interested in that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like any, we're almost back to an engineering discussion, aren't we? We're into a control mechanism. It's about saying what we're trying to do right now is plan ahead and say, if we want to have diversity of 50-50 in 3 years' time, and we know that we have a higher attrition rate, for example, in a particular population, then we try to hire more in the beginning, so that we're saying our target is after a 3-year period, we're actually at 50-50.
So you have to be super intentional in that case.
Yes, so we focus on the retention very much, but we do see a higher turnover in females in the organization. We have another program that just focuses on that to try to put in coaching and mentoring and care around that. But then also saying, okay, can we hire 60-40 coming in, for example, for a period of time to get us to the 50-50?
The other point that I wanted to just talk to you about was, how do you deal with the fact that people would say, listen, there are just not that many women, qualified candidates, who have this exact profile? Are there other ways that you're thinking about hiring, and how does that work?
Well, I think Chantal was making a great point about it's all in the language, isn't it? Qualified, that's a nice word. That's a very subjective word. What does qualified mean? You look at any job that's going on in the world today. Yes, okay, to be a doctor, you have to pass certain exams and you have to be qualified. Okay, but after that, I mean, a lot of the roles in our company, in Schneider, for example, some of them are about engineering. But we're a tech company, but not everybody has to be an engineer. And we sort of, when you grow up hiring engineers, it almost just becomes like default. Oh, I need an engineer, but actually maybe you don't. What you need is somebody who's coming in with a totally different thinking that can bring that diversity of thought and challenge and help the company to move to a different level.
Yeah, well, I think that's super interesting, because I think that is holding us back, to Chantal's point about language. What does it mean to be in technology? What does it mean to be in science today? I mean, everything is technology and science today. And so when you think about sort of not enough girls and women in STEM, I think that's a little bit of a derailer. And so back to your point about what happens at 10 years old, I think maybe that would help us.
Well, I think this is obviously where the issue needs to be addressed if it's going to be fixed long term. Is that how do you make science and engineering just more exciting for 10-year-olds? Historically, there's a view of engineering as bashing a piece of metal in a cold workshop somewhere, and obviously there was a dimension of that. But when you look at what science and tech is all about today, and particularly when you reflect that into what people are becoming passionate about, which is, of course, the climate change topic, the solution to climate change is all about engineering. It's all about science. So suddenly there's an opportunity to make science as being the resolution factor to one of the biggest challenges that humanity has faced. And I think there's a wonderful opportunity there to link these two topics at around the age of 10 to say, this is what you should be in. This is about the existential survival of the human race on the planet.
Or in the language of 10-year-olds, it's cool.
It's cool. It's cool.
So I mean, that's kind of a real issue. So it feels like, we kind of, I think in popular culture have this image of, like, particularly now with the tech industry, of sort of these sort of white guys in hoodies who get like pizza slid under their door as like, whereas we know that technology is much broader, and I agree with you. I think we really do have to make it more aspirational, and also kind of explain to children what really they can do with technology and science, and particularly with girls. And so I love your idea that sort of 10 and 40 are the two inflection points we have to focus on. But how do you make change happen within a company? I mean, how do you change culture? Is it tone at the top? What do you do in the middle? What tactics have you guys employed that seems to work?
I think first of all, it starts off as you have to have somebody who's passionate about the topic and wants to move the needle. And that can relate to any topic in a company or in any kind of organization. It's where you have a group of people where it behaves in a certain way and somebody has a passion to make it behave a little bit differently. Okay, so you need that catalyst to begin with. Okay, and that's where I think this type of public discussions are extremely important, where people would then reflect on that and say, oh yeah, that's an important topic. I never sort of thought about that too much. Okay, so in Schneider, I mean, we're lucky in that that's really driven right from the top. I mean, there's just a passion to build a company which represents our population and our customers' population that we deal with, based on those proven studies that says diversity in companies gives greater performance.
Yeah.
Now, when we talk about diversity, we just don't talk about gender diversity. We also talk about ethnicity, we talk about geographic diversity, and we talk about age diversity. So, we have a very good, I would say, a good healthy view of what we mean around diversity, and we're trying to move the needle on all of those things. So it comes from the top, and then it has to come through the company culture. And then what happens is it will typically be picked up with a mix of policies that are trying to drive something where the various parts of the organization have to comply to that. But I think more important is, again, picking up as it comes down the organization, people who also have a passion for that and say, but of course we have to do that. And I think it's a combination of the two. I think again, the point Chantal was making about if it comes across as over forceful, there's this concept in engineering of eddy currents. The harder you push in one direction, you have others coming back against you. And I think it's finding that balance, and I think the language and the degree of how policies are rolled out is very important.
Again, it's a marketing issue.
Totally agree. It's a marketing issue.
But I love this. I love what Chantal was saying earlier about, obviously, we know that the business case is kind of clear, but how do we move from beyond admiring the problem to the tactics? And I feel like you guys have done that really well, particularly on the pay equity side. Can we talk about pay equity briefly, what you've done there?
Sure.
And what do you think about the government role as well?
Yeah, I mean, so again, I think this is a classic example of where discussing things in public and getting them on the public discourse agenda helps to move the needle. So I think as that has come out in the last few years around publishing gender pay gaps and equality of pay, of course that helps. I mean, that gets it into the discourse that says everybody to reflect with, oh yeah, okay, and I don't think it's necessarily, that we talk about hidden biases or unconscious bias. I think those are great moments for just people to, get that eureka moment. Oh yeah, I never thought about that, okay. Now, so I mean, as a company, we work hard on that, we measure that, we insist on being an equal opportunities employer, an equal pay employer. I think the way the statistics are published is a little bit unfortunate. And ironically, again, it's a very sort of a science geeky way of publishing them. It's an average of an average. And I think a lot of the message gets lost in there. If you're in an industry like we are in with Schneider Electric at the moment, and we're changing quickly, it's an average of what the men earn versus an average of what the females earn. Across the whole company.
Right.
Now, if you've had an organization that's grown up over 25 years and a lot of your senior people were male, then you just get the averages just don't work. Okay?
Right.
So I think it definitely helps to move the needle. It definitely helps the discussion. We focus hugely on that because of that. It's clearly something that's in the discourse.
I know you've made a lot of
But
progress.
I think it could be clearer around what exactly, gender pay gap and equal pay are not exactly the same thing.
Right. Well, we love having you here. And, as you know, we have Seneca Connect app, which is about sharing best practices and all that good stuff. But I have to ask you as your last question, what got you sort of into this area? And what's the backstory there?
Yeah. So again, a couple of interesting points there. I mean, my first moment of awakening, we were sort of discussing it a little bit, was a little bit in reverse, because I sort of grew up in an environment and was brought up in an environment. I'm of five. We're three sisters, two brothers, and my two parents were entrepreneurs and running the. And I never noticed the difference. In fact, I was often thinking, wow, I need to speed up here to keep up, My awakening was more when I started getting mainly into the work world and seeing that the behaviors of some of my colleagues that quite surprised me. So wow, they said that's where did that come from, sort of thing, So that was quite interesting, was to see what some behaviors there are, and again, when I see that, then I say, okay, I have a passion about that, because I don't think that's correct. That's not the way I was sort of brought up, if you like, in that's not in my DNA, and I wouldn't call it a passion for that. I would just say, but that's something that I should be doing as well.
And maybe it's in part because you're from the same town as Mary Robinson, so
yes,
that could be in the DNA and in the water. Well, with that, we're so happy to have you here. We really appreciate your time.